him and tell him she loved him on the phone. I don't know what to say to her.
There are other worries. Dan had no insurance and Kelly has no job. But at the moment, that all seems so trivial after all that she's seen.
And I caught the plane going into the building, and that's all the first night I could think about was I could picture him on it. I don't know if he knew anything or what, but
An image, she says, that will stay with her forever and ever. Ann McDermott, CNN, Los Angeles.
Well, CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war continues in a moment. We'll see you again at 10 o'clock tonight.
President Bush delivers his strongest words yet about the U.S. response to Tuesday's terrorist attacks. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. We want to begin by updating you on the day's developments.
President Bush called Osama bin Laden the, quote, prime suspect in Tuesday's attacks, repeating a pledge that the United States will respond.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that. As we plan, as we put our strategy into action, we will let you know when we think it's appropriate, not only for to protect the lives of our servicemen and women, but to make sure our coalition has had proper time to be noticed as well. But we're going to act.
On the investigative front, CNN has learned that two hijackers aboard the plane that crashed into the Pentagon were being watched by U.S. intelligence because of an alleged connection to the attack on the USS Cole off Yemen last October. Meantime, the INS has detained 25 individuals on possible immigration violations. Among them, two men who authorities say were carrying box cutters aboard a Newark to San Antonio flight that was diverted Tuesday after the four hijackings unfolded. The flight data and cockpit voice recorders have been recovered from the Pentagon and the Pennsylvania crash sites, but not from the World Trade Center. Round-the-clock search and rescue efforts continue at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. New York's police commissioner says the death toll stands at 152, with nearly 5,000 people still missing. Firefighters laid to rest three of their own today, including Reverend Michael Judge, a fire department chaplain who was delivering last rites to a firefighter killed in the attack on the first tower. Reverend Judge was killed in the crush of the second tower's collapse. And Continental Airlines, citing an industry slowdown resulting from the terror attacks, announced today that it's furloughing some 12,000 employees. Continental CEO is making an urgent appeal to Congress to keep the airline industry afloat. A measure that would have provided $2.5 billion to the airline industry was defeated today in the House of Representatives. Joey?
All right, as you have just heard, the language coming from President Bush is anything but subtle. CNN's Kelly Wallace is following the commander-in-chief and joins us now live with the latest out there. Kelly.
Well, Joey, definitely the toughest talk yet from President Bush since Tuesday's deadly terrorist attacks. The president appears to be trying to do a couple of things. Number one, sending a message to U.S. troops and to the American people to get ready for what could be a long-term military campaign, but also knowing that the American people are angry and hungry for some swift retaliatory attack. The president also saying that Americans should be patient, that his response will come in time. Now, President Bush started his day getting his normal national security briefings and then having a 3-hour meeting with his national security team. As you can see, also at that meeting, of course, Vice President Dick Cheney. The Vice President has been spending the past couple of days up at Camp David after the Secret Service determined, based on security concerns, that it would be best not to have the President and the Vice President in the same place. Before that meeting got underway, Mr. Bush talking at length with reporters. He said that the U.S. will get the terrorists, those responsible for these deadly attacks, no matter what it takes.
They will try to hide. They will try to avoid the United States and our allies. But we're not going to let them. They run to the hills. They find holes to get in. And we will do whatever it takes to smoke them out and get them running, and we'll get them.
And when asked if the president's words are a way for him to start laying the groundwork for using ground troops to attack terrorists and those who harbor them, the president's spokesman, Ari Fleischer, saying that nothing has been ruled out. Now, Mr. Bush is expected to have dinner this evening with members of his national security team and then have more meetings on Sunday. The president also expected to keep working the phones. He spoke with the leaders of Spain and Mexico today. Also, Joey, Secretary of State Colin Powell confirming what CNN has been reporting since yesterday, that the Pakistanis have agreed to fully cooperate with U.S. requests, and the U.S., according to sources, has asked the Pakistanis to allow U.S. planes to use Pakistani or fly over Pakistani airspace if the U.S. determines and decides to take any military action. Joey, back to you.
Kelly, does the president have any further plans to, we have seen him a couple of times this week speaking directly to the American public. Has he any other plans for another sort of formal address given the developments over the last couple of days?
Not at this time. You know, the president's schedule, we're really not getting details, basically just learning about his events as they happen. The president did talk directly to the American people in his radio address today, another time where he was basically calling on Americans to be patient and laying out the case for what he plans to do. Again, we don't have word about his schedule, but you can expect that this president will continue to go before the American people because he knows that there's tremendous support right now for some military response, but keeping up that support will definitely be a bigger and bigger challenge the more time goes on. And Joey, of course, a bigger challenge too if any prolonged military attack involves some U.S. troops losing their lives. So expect to see the president going before the American people to continue to explain what he plans to do, and obviously, definitely to go before the American people once any action is taken. Joey?
CNN White House correspondent Kelly Wall is joining us and traveling with the president today. Wolf.
By calling up more than 50,000 reservists for what's described as, quote, homeland defense, President Bush has already taken a key step toward mobilizing the United States military. CNN's Jamie McIntyre joins us now from the Pentagon with the latest on that front. Jamie, what's going on today?
Well, some of those reservists may be getting their notices within the next couple of days. In fact, some reservists have already been called up, some Coast Guard reservists, to begin increasing patrols along America's coast. This phrase you're going to be hearing now, homeland defense, is something that the United States is going to be putting more emphasis on. Up until now, war hasn't touched U.S. soil in this century, or even in the last century, but there is going to be a much greater emphasis on increasing security and protecting the United States. At the same time, here at the Pentagon is not just office space for Pentagon workers, it's also a symbol of the U.S. military and the arsenals of democracy. Because of that, it's very important that this historic building be rebuilt, according to Pentagon officials. And today they announced that the first contracts had been let to begin the rebuilding process as soon as all of the remains have been cleared away and the building has been shored up. They released some video today showing the inside of the building, the devastating damage where 189 people died, 64 of them on that airplane. They will have to renovate about 4 million square feet of this building and remove about 350 million pounds of debris before they can start rebuilding the building. They'll have to strip it down to the columns, but they do say they will get that done within a couple of years. and that they will have that wedge of the Pentagon back in business as soon as it is possible. Wolf?
Jamie, as you know, the Pentagon has been undergoing a massive renovation that's going to supposedly take many years. Is this going to set back the overall plan to rebuild the Pentagon?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, obviously it is a setback. The Pentagon was supposed to be renovated entirely by 2012. And in fact, this area the renovations had just been completed, and they were about to move to the next wedge of the building. The Pentagon is divided into 5 wedges. Now they're going to be rebuilding that wedge while the new wedge that had just been refurbished along with the second one, and they'll be putting a lot of effort into doing that still within the same overall time frame. But the commitment here is to put the building back together in better shape than it was originally, restoring its original limestone facade and incorporating the latest in security features, blast-proof windows, fire retardant walls, and sprinkler systems. All of the features, they say, that in the newly renovated wedge of the Pentagon help to save a lot of lives, and that this death toll of 126 people in the building, or 125 people in the building who were killed, would have been much higher had they not had some of those new security features in that part of the building.
And Jamie, getting back to the report that you're giving us about the call-up of the reserves of the National Guard, well, what about calling up additional reservists and National Guard troops if, in fact, an offensive military plan is formulated and begins to go into operation? Any indication at all about plans going forward on that front?
Well, Pentagon officials are downplaying the idea that there's going to be any imminent military action and any imminent additional call-up of reserves, but they say that that certainly is an option down the road. Now, part of the emphasis of this administration and Pentagon is to keep secret things secret. They want to try to keep as much operational security as possible about their future plans, and so it's going to be a little difficult to figure out, and we may not even want to report on what it is they have in mind. But at this point, there's no indication of imminent military action. If the U.S. were to launch some large-scale operation, it would inevitably result in the call-up of more reserves, because the way the military is organized these days, it depends on the reserves for many key job specialties.
Jamie McIntyre, our military affairs correspondent at the Pentagon, thank you very much. Back to you, Joey.
Well, if you can see the operation underway at this hour in Lower Manhattan, take a look at the picture, a live picture from Lower Manhattan at this hour as the work continues, a desperate effort to find any remaining survivors at the World Trade Center site. Unfortunately, we are sorry to report to you today that the number of missing has tragically grown. CNN's Richard Roth is following now from our overview vantage point in Lower Manhattan with the latest on the rescue efforts. Richard.
Overview of Ground Zero, and sadly the number of missing unaccounted for has grown to 4,972. That's about 200 higher than the total since this disaster erupted. Officials explain the count went up due to missing person out-of-town reports filed outside of New York City and Manhattan, and more relatives trickling into New York City crisis centers. Authorities say 152 bodies have been pulled so far from the rubble, 18 of them firefighters, and more than 100 hours, 100 hours, more than 4 days after the planes hit the towers, there's really been no significant discovery of survivors. No pings, no knocks, no cries, just tons of wreckage coming up, and that's what they've been working on in assembly lines, chains, hands clawing in there, trying to get whatever they can out, and then the trucks take a lot of the debris to Staten Island. The bodies are taken away also. The workers have got a boost from the visit of President Bush yesterday, but still haven't given up hope yet. Some think there are some pockets where people could be, areas that have almost relatively remained untouched, reported CNN's Marty Savage an hour ago, but they still haven't found any survivors. Now, a minor part of the story, though, of course, those that have survived, the people who lived in the neighborhood and on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and the Tribeca area, downtown New York City. Those people are there, but also the financial center. In the financial district, they were tests done on the computer, the utility lines. Workers swarmed in. New York Stock Exchange Chairman Richard Grasso says all systems are go for an opening of the stock market on 9:30 on Monday morning. Instead, the traders are going to pause for 2 minutes before the trading goes on, to honor those killed, everyone will be singing God Bless America, and instead of corporate executives or even Michael Jackson, boy, doesn't that seem like a long time ago when he rang, or so to speak, the NASDAQ start of the market a week ago or so, it'll be rescue workers. Various agency heads will ring the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. Richard Grasso, the head of the exchange, asked traders to use and take time and reason for the decisions involving their transactions starting on Monday. Also returning will be those who live in the area, and they went back. Some of them were given only 10 minutes of time to get into their homes and check their belongings, check their pets. Some 25,000 people live in the area. New York City police, though, have had to deal with a lot of tourists and onlookers, a lot of people bringing cameras. The subways were a little bit crowded with people coming down here to take a look at what was the United States, one of the biggest stories in U.S. history. They don't want these kind of people here because you really can't get a good view. There are buildings in the way, and certainly police are keeping a lot of all the people back, including the press at times. So don't come down here if you don't have any business. Joey.
Richard, let me ask you about the scene as you've been able to see it behind you. I have read in some reports that 10,000 tons, maybe much more than that, have already been removed from the site. I'm wondering, as you look down from your rooftop vantage point, whether you see that that is making much of a dent in the huge amount of rubble that is down below you.
We don't have a clear view of the biggest mound of rubble, only we get reports. I spoke to two people who flew in on one of the first passenger jets out of Oakland, California last night. They flew over the World Trade Center site, what used to be the Trade Center, as is customary of planes arriving at New York airports. They described a disastrous scene, a lot of rubble, but they are making progress. I think it's around at least 20,000 tons have been removed so far, but we cannot see it from here, and a tourist or anyone who wants to come down here with a camera is certainly not going to see it. And that's why they caution these people to stay away.
Absolutely. The work is hard enough without people getting in the way. CNN's Richard Roth joining us from our vantage point overlooking Lower Manhattan. Wolf?
Joey, there were some key developments today involving the investigation, including news that two of the hijackers were under surveillance by U.S. intelligence. CNN's Eileen O'Connor joins us now with more on those developments. Eileen, tell us what you've learned.
Well, Wolf, U.S. officials confirmed that U.S. intelligence had two of the men who hijacked a plane from Dulles Airport and crashed it into the Pentagon on a watch list. They informed the FBI that Khalid al-Mihdhar and Salim al-Hamzi were associated with Osama bin Laden. Why? Because one source says al-Khalid was captured on surveillance tape in Malaysia, meeting with the suspect in the bombing of the USS Cole. That's Khalid al-Mihdhar. And despite that, all these men lived in San Diego, along with al-Hamzi's brother. According to a landlord there, they left at one point. Nawak al-Hamzi telling his landlord he was now in Arizona. Another hijacker, Hani Hanjour, lived in Phoenix and received flight training at a flight school there. Now, it's unclear whether al-Khalid and the other al-Hamzi brothers ever received flight training there as well, but they did attend a community college in San Diego. And the Justice Department says that 25 people have now been detained on possible INS visa violations. Law enforcement sources have also widened the watch list and are currently keeping a lid on that master list, giving it out pretty much to law enforcement authorities only. But they may be releasing some of that information, even to the public in the next few days, to try to apprehend people, according to sources. Now, people will be apprehended as material witnesses. That means, though, that some are very likely to be cleared. Two individuals, sources say, have been detained for immigration issues. They are Mohammed Jawed Asmath and Ayub Ali Khan. They are being transported to New York for questioning. The two had tickets on a flight from Newark to San Antonio. That flight was diverted to St. Louis when the hijackings began. The two then took a train bound for San Antonio, but they were taken off the train in Dallas. Authorities say they possess box cutters, which investigative sources say the hijackers used to take control of at least one of the planes. While it could be a coincidence, sources say there are other reasons these two men attracted their attention. Meanwhile, a man arrested under a material witness warrant remains in custody. His information in New York, sources say, is moving this investigation forward. Sources say there could be two more cells or groups of terrorists still at large. Sources say dozens of material witness warrants are likely to be served in the next few days on individuals around the country. Many of these may have information, others may not. Now, also, law enforcement sources are telling us that people on this watch list that's sought by investigators, they share some common characteristics. They're looking for men or women in their early 20s of Middle Eastern citizenship, predominantly with Saudi Arabian passports, and they have no U.S. residency. They're clean-shaven with a Western appearance. They have pilot licenses or are familiar with planes, with visas designating them as students. And they're using names at times similar to the hijackers. Now, the use of all these similar names, Wolf, and possibly the use of stolen names, has frustrated this investigation at every turning point, law enforcement sources say. Wolf?
So, Eileen, I know you've been doing some excellent reporting on all of this. How close do the investigators, the law enforcement authorities, the FBI, and the others, how close do they believe they are to wrapping up this plot involving these 4 airliners, and you say a couple other cells may still be at large? How close do they think they are to wrapping it all up?
They're not close at all, Wolf. This is going to take months and years. They're reassessing all of the information about all terrorist acts going back even into the early 1980s. They're looking at links from this action to terrorist groups that were involved in actions in Beirut, in Lebanon. You remember, Wolf, the car bombing of the Marine embassy there. Also to the USS Cole, as these 2 men were associated with that attack. Also to the last attempt on the World Trade Center. Every single terrorist act in the last 20 years is being reassessed. Testimony and cases, everything is being looked at against all the intelligence out there. Well,
so are they assuming it's not necessarily simply the Osama bin Laden organization known as Al-Qaeda, but other groups that are terrorist in their orientation may be associated? There may be a much broader plot here?
Absolutely. They're looking at what really is a confederation, if you will, of a lot of small groups. Groups that have some ties in Pakistan, the groups, of course, associated with Osama bin Laden, and also they're looking at Algerians. They're looking perhaps to even some links to Chechnya. They're also looking to links to people associated with actions out of Lebanon. This is a broad network, and this took a lot of planning and a lot of determination, and that is what is really frightening to law enforcement officials. Well,
so I assume, Eileen, they're also looking at some states that may be involved in this, some governments that may be sponsoring or aiding, harboring these kinds of terror organizations.
They are, and they're also going to be putting pressure on governments that have been reluctant to be involved in these investigations before to really come up with the goods and push hard on some of their individuals and citizens now. Well,
so the investigation, according to Eileen O'Connor, is just beginning. Thank you very much, Eileen. Let's go back to Joey.
Well, if another urgent issue on the mind of the nation's leader, what effect all this will have on the economy. The ripple effect of Tuesday's disaster is now being felt in the airline industry. Continental Airlines today said it is putting on furlough 12,000 employees. Earlier in the week, you will recall, Midway Airlines said it would stop its operations. Both carriers acting out of concern that the attacks would lead to slowdowns in the industry and in the economy as a whole. Looking at the nation's airports for signs that the country is ready to take to the air again, CNN's Kathleen Koch is at Reagan National Airport. Kathleen.
Joey, this is the one and only airport that remains closed within the United States, but you may see planes moving behind me because the Department of Transportation decided just this afternoon that they would let somewhat more than 120 aircraft, which were stranded here on Tuesday when the skies were shut down, they would give those aircraft a chance to take off and get back into circulation. Now, Joey, this does not change the fact that this airport remains temporarily closed indefinitely because the FAA still has a lot of concerns about its proximity to the nation's capital, to vital buildings like the White House, the Capitol, to, of course, the Pentagon. Now, as you pointed out, we are already seeing a toll being taken within the airline industry by the terrorist attacks on Tuesday. There was a press conference this afternoon where the CEO and chairman of Continental Airlines announced not only the furloughing of those 12,000 employees, but also the fact that they were going to be reducing their long-term flight schedule by 20%. And Gordon Bethune issued a plea to the federal government.
I now, and we all of us, call on the President of the United States and members of our Congress to take immediate action to restore the stability of this vital industry on which our whole nation's economy heavily depends. Our industry needs direct and immediate government-sponsored liquidity and aid if we and a vital part of our economy are to survive.
CNN has checked in with numerous airlines throughout the day, and they are reporting that they are struggling to get all their flights in the air. As we go down the list, American Airlines said that it hoped to get about 50% of its flights out today. Continental, 55%. Delta Airlines, 60%. Northwest Airlines was shooting for 50%, and United Airlines had a goal of just 21%. So, Joey, as you can see, it's clearly going to be a pretty significant amount of time before the nation's skies do get back to normal and air traffic gets rolling.
And Kathleen, in addition to the sort of security delays that we have all heard warned about that we should anticipate for anyone who is going to any airport in the United States, keeping Reagan National closed at this point, does that also contribute to the delays in that airplanes cannot land there or take off from there? That's a big chunk of the airline system that's taken out.
It really does mean that, Joey, especially for the nearby airports, Dulles International Airport in Virginia and Baltimore-Washington International Airport, which is between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. You are going to obviously see a great increase in traffic at those airports, and anyone wanting to fly into this area is going to have to go to those two airports. So that will definitely lead to a greater backlog.
CNN's Kathleen Koch out at Reagan National Airport. Also in the nation's capital, Wolf.
Joey, thank you. An attempt to lessen the impact on the nation's air carriers has already reached Capitol Hill. On what lawmakers are considering for the nation's ailing economy, here's CNN's congressional correspondent Kate Snow. She's standing by. Kate, what is going on the Hill in order to help the airline industry?
Well, this morning at about 2 o'clock in the morning, Wolf, the House of Representatives was still hard at work here. They were trying to take up this airline measure. They had introduced a measure that would provide $2.5 billion in direct cash payments to the airline industry and then another additional $12.5 billion in loan assurances, loan guarantees for the airlines. Now, that bill at 2 in the morning this morning did not pass the House of Representatives. Why? Because there were many members who felt that it was unfair to single out the airline industry. They asked on the House floor, what about the financial industry? What about tourism? What about insurance companies? Just to name a few others that are expected to suffer great losses. House Democratic leader Dick Gephardt said he expects they're going to take up the airline industry measure again next week. Gephardt this afternoon sat down with some of his colleagues in a rare Saturday afternoon meeting inside the Capitol. Our cameras were allowed inside for just a few moments of that meeting. They were talking about the economy more generally and about the airlines. They were talking about Congress trying to send a signal both to Americans and to Wall Street when Wall Street reopens for business on Monday, that Congress is ready to do something to help bolster the economy. Mr. Gephardt saying Congress has a big role to play in telling consumers to be confident.
We've got to give people confidence to go back out and go to work, buy things, go back to the stores, get ready for Thanksgiving, get ready for Christmas, get out and be active, participate in our society.
Now, Republicans have been singing the same tune. They are also talking about ways to stimulate the economy. It should be noted that Democrats and Republicans do have a little bit of a different idea about how that could be done. Republicans very much focused on capital gains tax reductions and other business tax reductions. Mr. Gephardt suggesting today that he might look at that rebate check that every American has just gotten in the mail, maybe sending out another rebate check. So, Wolf, a lot of discussion going on next week when Congress returns here. I'm told by Democrats that everything will be on the table, and they hope to work with their Republican counterparts to get some sort of stimulus package through this Congress. Wolf?
Kate Snow on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. Joey?
All right, on the issue of whether rescuers are able to work through their emotions, the man who runs the nation's emergency agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Joe Albaugh, speaking just a few minutes ago with reporters near the Pentagon, talking about the efforts there, the grim work that is underway at the Pentagon, the nation's head military fortress. It has been a very difficult task, as Joe Albaugh noted just a few minutes ago.
These are American heroes, let me tell you. I'm not sure that I could do what they do. It takes a unique individual, men and women alike, working shoulder to shoulder to go inside with their dogs. They live with their dogs, they sleep with their dogs, they bathe with their dogs. They have the best technical equipment that is available to find individuals to work their way through this problem. It is amazing. These are truly American heroes, and we all ought to be proud of them. You see a law enforcement officer, you see a firefighter, you ought to stop them and thank them for what they do. They put their lives on the line every day. and yet they're always the first in line for budget cuts and the last in line for recognition. That's got to stop. These people are American heroes, and we ought to thank every one of them. It's amazing.
Joe Albaugh echoing sentiments that a lot of folks are feeling today. I don't know if you could tell from looking at him on videotape, but Joe Albaugh is a very big, strong man. He's a man with a great deal of emotion today about what is happening at the Pentagon site. We have seen so much of what is going on at the World Trade Center site. It's a little bit harder to tell at the Pentagon. But again, he is noting that we should all recognize the heroism of the folks who are working so hard to pick through that rubble. As we continue to talk about the losses, America's planes returned to the skies today, and New York began the bitter task of burying its dead. Manhattan firefighters, you see, paying final respects to some of that city's most beloved and valued leaders. Buried today were William Feehan, who was the department's first deputy commissioner, and chief of the department, Peter Gamsey. And the goodbyes continue. Manhattan today, as a whole, saying goodbye to a man who is truly a dearly loved figure by so many in that city, known to many people just as Father Mike, known to all of them as a friend and as a caring man of God.
From death into life, shepherd me, O God.
We come to bury Mike Judge's body, but not his spirit. We come to bury his mind, but not his dreams. We come to bury his voice, but not his message. We come to bury his hands, but not his good works. We come to bury his heart, but not his love. Never his love.
We have to remember the spirit, the life, and the love that Father Mike left us, pulling us one to the other, giving us strength where it seems hard to imagine it could ever come again.
May the Lord now embrace you and hold you in his love forever. Rest in peace. Amen.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of America's new war. Let's recap the latest developments. U.S. intelligence sources say 2 of the suspected hijackers who crashed a plane into the Pentagon were under surveillance as possible associates of Osama bin Laden. One of the men was seen on a surveillance tape meeting with another man suspected in last October's bombing of the USS Cole off Yemen. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas delivered the eulogy today for Barbara Olson, a lawyer and a conservative television commentator. She was aboard the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She was the wife of the U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson, who was remembered as a woman who strode boldly through life, not slowed by any challenge or obstacle. The Pakistani government says it will support the United States in its response to the deadly terror attack. President Bush puts it simply. He says, quote, "We are at war and will respond accordingly." And Defense Department officials announced today that work will be getting underway soon to rebuild the Pentagon. They say the damaged part of the building will be rebuilt within a couple of years. The death toll from the crash there now stands at 189, including 64 people who were aboard the jetliner.
More here on the importance of what Pakistan has to offer. Pakistan's Cabinet and Security Council today pledging to fight international terrorism. Earlier in the week, you will note that Pakistan already had vowed to fully cooperate with the United States in its fight against terrorism. From Islamabad, here's CNN's Tom Mantier on the significance of that.
Decision time for the Pakistan government of President Pervez Musharraf.
We will consider all the pros and cons.
He opened the 4-hour joint meeting of the Cabinet and the Security Council with a call for a moment of silence to honor those who died in America. We were then excused as they discussed the U.S. call for help to punish those deemed responsible for the acts of terrorism in the U.S. Pakistan has already offered assistance in the battle against terrorism, but it's still not clear how this government will assist the United States if a military operation is required. Following the meeting, Pakistan's foreign minister preferred to talk about the United Nations, not the United States.
Consistent with Pakistan's record of support for the decisions of the Security Council, it was decided that the government will discharge its responsibilities under international law.
The UN Security Council has passed a resolution to condemn the acts of terrorism. The United States has pressed Pakistan to help, asking for permission to use Pakistani airspace if military action is required.
We are in the process of discussion with regard to details of the specific proposals. I can only indicate to you a general policy of support.
While sources in Washington and Islamabad are reporting full compliance with the U.S. requests, the foreign minister revealed no specific proposals or agreement. But in a sign of the political tightrope being walked by Pakistan's military leadership, even general support is enough to anger many here.
Pakistan is going to be in the front. America is putting them up front. The problems are all going to be in Pakistan.
There will be violence here. That is the reality.
Pakistan is playing it close to the vest, revealing little of what it plans to do to help the United States. The only clear point made by the government is that it will not participate in any military operation outside its borders. Tom Mantier, CNN, Islamabad, Pakistan.
And as you just heard, a number of dynamics will come into play as the United States tries to build and maintain support from Pakistan. CNN's Andrea Koppel joins us now from the State Department with more on this minefield that U.S. diplomats will have to negotiate. How's it going, first of all, Andrea, this diplomatic minefield?
Well, they seem to be walking through that minefield very well at this point, Wolf. Secretary Powell saying earlier in reference to Pakistan that he was very pleased and that he had received indications from the Pakistani government that they would get their full cooperation in whatever military response the U.S. decides it's going to take. We've been seeing a lot of this diplomatic maneuvering going on from this building here at the State Department in the last several days as the Secretary of State seeks to build this international coalition against terrorism, appealing not only to international organizations like NATO and the UN, but also to individual countries literally across the world. And this is why.
If, as the U.S. suggests, Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind Tuesday's attacks, going after him and shutting down his al-Qaeda terrorist network will require more than just a military assault on Afghanistan. That's because over the years, al-Qaeda has become an international network with cells rooted in almost every region of the world. That's why Secretary of State Colin Powell has put the world on notice. The United States needs help.
I am not threatening so much as I am saying this has become a new benchmark, a new way of measuring the relationship and what we can do together in the future.
Since Tuesday, Powell has had the world on speed dial, in particular reaching out to countries where the U.S. says Islamic militant groups have links to bin Laden's network.
Once these people have been trained in Afghanistan, we know that they've gone to Africa, we know that they've gone to Asia, we know that they've gone back to the Middle East, and it's clear now that they've also come to the United States.
People like Ahmed Rassam, the man charged with attempting to bomb the United States over the millennium. He's a member of Algeria's armed Islamic group, but was trained by bin Laden. So were members of Pakistan's Harak-ul-Mujahideen group, which hijacked an Indian jetliner to Afghanistan in December 1999. On Friday, Pakistan's president informed the U.S. his country is prepared to take specific steps to help the U.S. wage its campaign against bin Laden. And in the Arab world, Powell has asked countries like Saudi Arabia to cut off the flow of money and resources to bin Laden. For Secretary Powell, who led Allied troops to victory in the Gulf War, this war against terrorists will be fought on an entirely different battlefield.
And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option.
But diplomatic sources say whatever option the U.S. chooses to take, it will need the support of the Islamic world, of many Islamic countries. Such support would send a strong message to bin Laden and to his Islamic extremist supporters around the world, Wolf, that they have nowhere to hide.
Andrea, I'm wondering what kind of reaction Secretary of State Powell has been receiving from the Russian government and the Chinese government.
On both fronts, very positive reactions. We know that Powell's deputy, Richard Armitage, is going to be heading to Moscow midweek next week, on Wednesday, to hold this U.S.-Russian working group on Afghanistan that's been in place for the last several years. The Russians, as you know, have their own problems in Chechnya with Islamic extremists, and the Chinese as well have their own problems with Islamic extremists in the far northwest in Xinjiang province. And so both countries want to join this war, they say, against terrorists around the world, Wolf.
Andrea Koppel at the State Department, thank you very much. And we're just getting in some new video, first-time seen video from the Pentagon in the immediate aftermath of that Tuesday morning hijacked plane crash into the Pentagon. Let's take a look at this new video that we haven't seen before. It's from the Department of Defense. Sad pictures after having spent myself several years working as CNN's Pentagon correspondent, working in that very building, walking those corridors. I must say it's a sad picture every time I see these devastating pictures at the Pentagon.
It is shocking.
Joey?
It really is shocking. Note to our viewers for what is ahead at the top of the hour here on CNN. The advisor to CNN on military affairs, General Wesley Clark, the former Supreme Allied Commander for NATO, will be with us. Also with us, the former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, both men to talk about what is the next step in America's war on terrorism. Wolf?
Joey and Bob Novak and Al Hunt are standing by from the normal team of Evans, Novak, Hunt, and Shields. They're standing by with a special guest. I want to go to them right now.
Wolf, thank you. Welcome to Evans, Novak, Hunt, and Shields. I'm Al Hunt. Robert Novak and I will question the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
He is Republican Congressman Porter Goss of Florida. Mr. Chairman, all over Washington on Capitol Hill, people on your committee, on the Senate committee, have been saying this is an intelligence failure on the part of the CIA, that there wasn't advance warning of this catastrophe. Was this another intelligence failure?
I don't think that would be a fair characterization of what happened, but certainly we didn't have the information we needed it when we needed it. There are many elements to getting information to our leaders and in order to take the proper defenses and proper responses for these matters. There's a combination of intelligence, which operates abroad. As you know, we don't have an American intelligence system that works in this country as a protection against our constitutional rights. But we do have law enforcement in this country. So the key point is to get all of those agencies that are involved in intelligence overseas, which is more than just the CIA, and all those agencies that do law enforcement, protect our public safety in the United States, to work seamlessly and exchange information the best way they can, whether it's the INS or the customs people or the FAA or the FBI. All of this has to fit and work together. And it's quite clear that for whatever reasons it didn't work. And I would point out one other thing, and this is not an excuse. The fact is, we're a wonderful, free, democratic society. We are a country where freedom is respected and loved, and we go about our business in a somewhat naive way compared to other countries. That makes us a fairly easy target.
From the standpoint of accountability, sir, do you think perhaps George Tenet, the director of the CIA, will have to take the fall for this?
I don't think so. I think that would be unfair. I think George Tenet is, first of all, doing an extraordinarily good job as a director of CIA. He has an amazing grasp and a very quick fix on these kinds of things, and I've seen it in evidence in the past 72 hours. He has the president's ear. I know he is very much involved with getting the intelligence community organized to fit the threats of today. The truth of the matter is that Mr. Tenet has inherited an organization that has been underfunded, it is under-resourced, it deals with capabilities that are not entirely designed for the types of threats or technologies that we have today, and it has been sort of hard kicking us out of the rut we were in. It's the same kind of problem we've seen at the Defense Department to deal with today's problems, because they're not perceived as priority problems in this country. Most Americans were not thinking terrorism or anything about it until Tuesday morning.
In addition, sir, to all the liabilities of the CIA that you mentioned, there are many people in the intelligence community, and including people in Congress, who believe one of the problems is the rule that was put in about 1996 against hiring unsavory characters as paid informants. Do you think this has impeded the ability of the CIA to get advance warning of terrorism? And do you think that this restriction should be eliminated?
The answer is yes in both cases. Unmistakably, it has restricted our capabilities, and I guarantee you I can tell you that with confidence, because I have talked to our operatives around the world, and to a man in the field when I'm out there saying, could we do more if we could get permission to do it, the answer would be yes. The question of taking that risk and possibly having a diplomatic incident if something went wrong has weighed heavily. And we have made a policy decision back in Washington. Others have made policy decisions that we won't take those risks. Part of that is also a hangover from the problems of Central America. And there's just no question about it. There is a divide. There has been a discussion in this country about that. And it was sort of a societal decision to lean a little more on the sides of civil rights and emphasize that rather than the national security side. But nobody wants to shred the Constitution. That's critical. We are going to protect our rights and our freedoms in this country. That's what we are. That's what we stand for. On the other hand, we are clearly going to have to take some different restraints and some different practices in order to enhance our national security so this kind of stuff doesn't happen again.
Chairman Gause, the issue here, I think, is one of how effective it would be. Experts on some of these terrorists say, you're not going to infiltrate Osama bin Laden. These are small, family-oriented cells. And moreover, in the past, what you've done before that directive, it's been an excuse for thugs like Noriega and even some of Osama bin Laden's people to go on a CIA payroll and use it as a card for doing terrible things. Why won't that happen again?
Well, I've heard that argument a number of times. I will have to respectfully disagree. We have some extraordinary men and women right now overseas taking very high risks and doing very important work for the United States of America. I cannot sit here and list all of the successes, all of the bombs that did not go off, all of the airliners that did not crash. please accept for me as true that there are a number of them, because our folks have been doing good work. We don't have enough people. We don't have them all in the right places. We have been underfunded. People have not thought that having a good human intelligence capability was as essential as having other things, and consequently we did not fund it. It was not a priority item. I'm afraid now that we have an audience that is listening to the plea for more human intelligence, clearly we're going to get it. But let me tell you, you don't just push a button. This is a half a decade or more to train the right kind of people, to recruit the right kind of people, to get the people you need everywhere.
Sir, is this particular offensive, those 4 airplanes that did those terrible deeds last Tuesday, is this particular offensive still a threat?
Yes. The answer is not as to airlines that I know of. I cannot identify any specific team or so forth, but I can tell you there is still the intent. The target is clearly still here. I have heard...
Still aimed primarily at the nation's political and financial center, do you think?
I am relatively confident that it is accurate to say that the real estate between the United States Capitol and the Pentagon is still a target area. It's not the only one. I am confident to say that other easy targets, vulnerable targets that are particularly filled with innocent people that are easy targets to hit, which would be the terrorist tactic, where they would go in and do the most atrocious type of activity possible, the most heinous thing they could do in order to provoke the United States to take a unwise answer, to respond in a way that drags us down to their level. The President of the United States has clearly said we are not going to be dragged down to that level. Secretary Powell, Secretary Rumsfeld, Dr. Rice, all of the people on the team, Vice President Cheney, have made it very clear. We will get specific information, and we will respond on the basis of good information to go after the people responsible and make sure that nobody else gets hurt.
But, Mr. Chairman, the same people who say that we don't have the intelligence capabilities, for many of the reasons you stated, to get an advance warning, say it is very, very difficult to find not only who perpetrated this, but where they are now and get at them. Isn't this a tremendous problem to pinpoint these people and not just send out a blunderbuss attack on some Arab country?
I know. I feel the frustration, as every American does. I want to go out there and do something right now, and I want to use muscle. But you've got to understand, you've got to deal with terrorism with your brain. This is a cerebral matter. These are cunning people who are trying to suck us into things and take advantages of our weakness. So there is no easy target, but there is an international global network that has support systems, training systems, banking systems, money laundering systems, ticket buying systems, all kinds of things involved in it. We have a very broad trail. We are pursuing that trail right now very diligently. That is going to lead to opportunities to target. Now, as you heard Secretary Powell just say, this is not necessarily a blunt military force activity exclusively or perhaps ever. Maybe some of this can be done in other ways. My view is that we are sooner or later going to have to resort to lethal force, because I know that there is fanaticism involved.
But, Mr. Chairman, in 1998, after the embassy bombings, when President Clinton ordered the airstrikes, we ended up bombing a pharmaceutical plant that probably was just a pharmaceutical plant. We ended up bombing empty terrorist camps that didn't have anybody in them. Surely all of the terrorists have cleared out of Kabul and Afghanistan and their present camps after the threats that have come out of Washington this week, haven't they?
Let me put it this way. I think you are correct that it is the style of terrorists to do their thing and run back and hide in their hole. And I think they have very deep holes. And if anybody has ever seen the terrain in Afghanistan, it is very tough terrain. Ask anybody in the Soviet military about Afghanistan. But don't forget, the President has redefined for us state support for terrorism. And very clearly now, we are talking about safe harboring or any other type of cooperation or tolerance or winking and nodding at it. So we are, I think, are going to give states that we identify, and we already have a great list of them to work with, where activities are going on, and say, we will give you the opportunity to cooperate, to roll these people up, to put them out of business. We expect you to do the right thing, and if you don't, we'll be back and talking to you.
Mr. Chairman,
and I suspect we are going to get a lot of cooperation, and indeed we are already.
We're talking about a war, and I think you have said this is a long-run proposition.
It is
It's
indeed.
not going to happen easily. It's not going to happen quickly. Is it also inevitable that it will have to involve American ground forces going into places around the world? The Delta Force, SEALs, Rangers, is that an absolute inevitability?
I don't think it's an inevitability, and I wouldn't rule anything in or anything out. I think that would be very
But I'm just
wise.
saying that because in the past we thought we could all do it through sending some cruise missiles, which were easier.
Forget it. Risk is here. There are going to be casualties. Every leader of our country has said that. I'm sorry to say that, but this is a very serious war. These people expect a long haul, and they're going to get a long haul, and we will have casualties, so expect that. But we will fight it on every front, and we will fight it with all of the arrows in the quiver. And I'm not going to say any are in or any are out. This is not my call. Obviously, the President and his team
Is
will
it
make
also inevitable that there will be retaliation here in this country, whether it's biological, chemical?
It is inevitable that there will be an attempt to carry out the psychological warfare and profile activity, the playbook work of terrorism, by creating further incidents to try and make us fearful in our country and trying to get us not have the will to stamp out and eradicate terrorism, of course. But if our defenses are proper, and obviously we're on alert, and I think we can guarantee our people in this country a very reasonable degree of safety.
Chairman Gause, let me return to the September 11th attack. Former CIA Director James Woolsey has been on the television several times since then, suggesting that the principal suspect for a state that is supporting this terrorism would be Iraq. Many other people say that is just not the case. Where do you end up on that?
I don't want to be specific on anything that could possibly aid or abet possible targets or possible enemies or in any way impede our investigation, so I'm not going to go into area specificity. I will simply say that there is mischief afoot in Iraq, and I think that they will have the opportunity to show which side they're on, and if they fail to make the right choice, I suspect that would be an area where we would perhaps see that blunt force being used.
Could you say, sir, without specifying the state that is supporting this terrorism, whether you come down on the side of there is some state that is, or states that supported this, or whether this was a international freelance organization unconnected with any particular state?
I would say that there are states that are apparently complicit that will be given an opportunity to explain whether they were serious in their support or their tolerance. They just didn't know, because many states do not have competent forces, security forces. And I think that is something that our experts and our professional people in the days ahead will work out. There is no doubt in my mind that we are going to find some that are not going to cooperate with us. And it is no doubt in my mind that then the executive branch is going to have to propose and take steps to deal with that.
Chairman Gause, I think this is right. None of the Arab countries are a democracy. And yet we hear a lot of talk about the street, if you will, in the Muslim world, the popular pressure or uprisings that can be brought on some of those governments. I'm going to ask you particularly if you think that countries, Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Pakistan can cooperate fully with the United States without facing a street insurrection.
I think that this is a time of war, as the President has said, against terrorism, and I think this is a time that choice is going to have to be made by the leaders of those countries. I want to emphasize, we are talking about a radical few. We are not talking about most of the people in the Arab world. They are decent people getting along, trying to earn a living and have a life like everybody else. It is true that they might not fit our definition of democracy, but many of them are more democratic leaning than you would suspect. You have to sort of have the flavor of the neighborhood, as it were. And I think that's fair. I also feel very strongly that there is a problem for the presidents of some of those, the leadership of some of those countries, because they do have an element. It is no secret that Egypt has had some serious problems, and that efforts have been made to take out the President Mubarak, and that they've had horrible tourist fatality from terrorism in that country. That is risk. And I think what we are saying now is the time has come to deal with that because we know it's there, and they will have the choice, and I'm sure they'll make the right decision.
Mr. Chairman, we're almost out of time, but let me ask you the big question. Sure. For 25 years, we've had a ban on assassinations. Mm-hmm. With a new war on terrorism, should that ban be lifted?
Let me put it this way. I think lethal force at time of war is understood, but it is not a first resort. It is a last resort. I cannot foresee there will be a targeted list of assassinations. I can foresee that there would be an effort to arrest, as if it would be, some of the principal troublemakers, and in the process of that, I would expect lethal force to be applied, and there could be casualties, including those we are trying to arrest.
Mr. Chairman, one measure of a victory for the terrorists might be, in the opinion of some people, whether you close down Reagan National Airport, the close-in airport is the only airport at the moment that is closed down. There are rumors that it will never reopen. Do you think that is a prospect?
I certainly heard those rumors, and I think it probably will be sort of a bellwether case about the balance between our national security and protecting people reasonably, because good human being American citizens work in those buildings, and if they are going to continue to be targets and we have not been able to remove the threat another way, then perhaps prudence is to keep it shut. Our hope is we will remove the blight of terrorism and we'll go about our business.
Mr. Chairman, that's all the time we have now, but Congressman Porter Guy